Hello,
Hello,
we're back again,
he's Shabazz.
and he's Pete Marshall. And today we are discussing the comings and goings of Sajid Javid.
Yes,
And
the topic became interesting because even the BBC was had articles about why the ex-chancellor has been allowed to work for JP Morgan. And honestly, we thought it would be interesting in terms of, in some ways, it's less why he's allowed to,
yeah,
and it's more why he would want to, is the
yeah,
question we found interesting. Because in some ways, like, yeah, it felt to us like it was too dense a question and too expansive a question to talk about why he's allowed to, um, but why he would want to. That seems like more of a doable question.
so why? And I'll put that straight to you then. Why do you think he wants to?
Um, because he's taking a temporary kind of sojourn into politics in order to garnish his CV, um, for for when he goes back and basically does what he has done, and and becomes one of and works for the major banks. Like, let's be honest with each other, he's always been a banker. That's what he is. Like, the fact that and honestly, an important point here is the entire notion of kind of legislative capture, um, or kind of political engineering is another term for it. And honestly, this is entirely about, um, if, and this is entirely about, um, how do you make your profession, like, basically as powerful as possible, or seem as powerful as possible to politicians. And with banking, it's always been a thing where they have understood the importance of knowing and being known by the people in charge. So in that sense, it's less strange that it happens, and more, well, why don't we have a system that expects this to happen? Like, honestly, like, it's this isn't even the only country that he's done this. Like, he worked for Rudy Giuliani in when he was in New York. So in the end, yeah, he goes to who, like, part of his career plan is to find is to part of his career plan is to find out every is to be impressive to everyone who has power, and get as good a positions as he can. And he's already got as far as he can without becoming chancellor. Um, and then he started, and so he became an MP for the Conservative Party, and then worked his way to being chancellor. And now he's going back to the bank. So in some ways, and again, there are people right now in the Conservative Party doing exactly the same thing in their own respective industries. Helen Whatley comes to mind on this front. So
I think it's disgusting that it's allowed to happen so so easily. I think it should be, uh, you know, yeah, you can blame the individual, but I think the procedures are to blame as well for allowing this situation to exist really, and to for allowing it to exist so easily, and so the connection being so smooth between these two areas.
I mean, I think the counter argument, in order to play somewhat devil's advocate, has traditionally been that you need people with a wide range of experience. And honestly, that can work out sometimes, but honestly, but honestly, the blunt answer here is I think that it's, the entire banking structure and a few other structures um, are built on the notions of legislative capture. I mean, that's what the entire notion of like too big to fail is. Like, you could have a too big to fail anything. All you need to do is convince the chancellor that if it fails, then the entire world will collapse and there'll be rioting on the streets. And then basically you're too big to fail. You could have a too big to fail flour company. I mean, it's quite funny. Do you know there has only only ever been one time that a bank has gone on strike, and do you know how long it lasted?
No.
It lasted over 50 years.
What?
And everyone just and it just it had actually very little effect. And
Well,
honestly, and just to quickly say the funniest thing about this happened in Ireland, and a whole load of bank managers got very frustrated and said, "We aren't getting paid enough. This is really bad." And so basically they went on strike, and then they were, and basically then the and then the group that kind of started handing out notes, effectively promissory notes, were the pubs.
what?
Because I mean, in terms of notes, you need two things. You need A, to know that the person can pay you back, and B, you need you need to have a thing that you can always trade for that note. Generally, it's taxes, but honestly, it could be beer or anything really that everyone wants. And so honestly, pubs are ideal. Like, pubs can do loads of things that pubs can do loads of things that banks can do. Honestly, loads of groups could do what banks do. I mean, one of the advantages of pubs, especially in Ireland, is that actually it's really easy for pubs to work out who's good for the cash, because it's very easy to work out who's getting on well at their job and whose life is somewhat a disaster if you've seen them drunk. So honestly, I think I think there's very traditionally an argument that banks are too big to fail because they're somehow special, because they're somehow, the economy needs them to exist. And I think that in some ways, I don't think that that's true. And I think that it's not hard to argue that it's not particularly true. And honestly, once you get to that point, then you go, okay, so why do people think that this is true? That this not true thing is true? And then you get, and legislative capture. Um, I mean, there is an
When
argument.
you say legislative capture, what do you mean by that? I think I know what you mean, but just to
I mean,
clarify.
basically, it can happen in multiple different ways. Most of these ideas, when they're talked about in they're most interesting when you talk about the military-industrial complex in the US. And basically, there's an entire thing that, for example, if the Pentagon wants a new drone program, then basically they will try to have as many different bits made in as many different states as they possibly can, because they know that even Bernie Sanders is not going to say no to jobs in his state. He can't vote against it. So therefore, they're going to vote for this thing, even if it is an objectively stupid, pointless, or whatever military program. But in the end, theoretically, it can happen. Especially in kind of the military-industrial complex, it's very easy to kind of do it in that way. But theoretically, it can happen in multiple different ways. It's just the fact. It's in itself. It's just the fact that um, a company ensures that people with money need them to do a thing or owe them favors or yada yada yada, and then they ask them for that, and then they just the people in power just do it. So
But I, I find it, you know, for example, let me put it this way: Eh, when he got this job, the the bank released a statement welcoming him, welcoming him back to J.P. Morgan.
hmm,
So it was like, so it's there in black and white that it's a revolving door.
I mean, to me, what's more problematic about this is because I think to some degree there is a certain level of legitimacy to people with wide ranges of experience have like being in politics and having different experiences. What I find more troubling about this is the fact that I'm not sure it makes our laws better. Like real talk, if Sajid
Hang
Javid,
on, hang on, hang on, hang on, hang on, hang on. You're not sure it makes our laws better. That makes them absolutely worse, right?
well, I mean not,
You're being you're
I mean
being very
actually,
charitable there.
I mean
So
actually, I mean I mean I'm trying to make this into a very I mean basically it's possible. I mean, for example, one of the things that Donald Trump argued was that he knew the system, and so he'd manipulated the system in the past, and so he could fix the system. Okay, well that's an argument. You can make that, and actually politicians have done it in the past. The question is, does Sajid Javid and Helen Whatley and half a dozen of these other people, have they done that? And if the answer is no, that's more of a problem really than the fact that they have this experience. The fact they have this experience may not actually be the biggest issue. And even the fact that their future careers may not be the biggest issue. I would also say that one of the other incredibly irritating topic here is I'm not actually sure that it makes business better. I mean, honestly, one of the most singular cases of this is actually a Labour case. Ed Miliband is like part of, I think, Facebook's like Office for Social Responsibility or market, or you know, basically he gets paid by them to make them look nice. Well, really? Like that's like they need someone to make them look good, and so they choose Ed Miliband. That, like, in what universe is that a good argument? Like, he didn't even make the Labour Party look good at that point. And
are, are
honestly,
you are you getting Edmund Man mixed up with Nick Clegg? Because Nick
possibly,
Clegg,
probably, yes.
because I know Nick Clegg is their global communications
Yeah.
director.
Sorry, Nick Clegg is even
So
worse, honestly. So I was being too charitable to like Facebook. So I'm sorry. So, I'm sorry, Ed Miliband. Nick Clegg, wonderful.
yeah,
Like, and so, like, what has Facebook genuinely gained from this? And honestly, it was quite interesting that this week the Ameri- the American Congress had or maybe the House of Representatives actually had a thing on whether Facebook was breaking antitrust laws, which I thought it would never happen, but great. They've actually got even vaguely serious about thinking about maybe at some point doing anything about this. Um, I'm not going to go into that today. But so honestly, like in terms of is this like I think there's a serious question here about actually are I mean in order as a fairly basic point, in order like the very base note of patriotism for these people is, are they making their countries better by serving in the parliament? And if they genuinely don't aren't, and if they genuinely don't even try to, that's a problem in itself. Like, that's just corruption at that point. That's not patriotic or anything. But honestly, we also need business to actually, business. Like we do, like we need stuff to be produced, and and we need people at the top of business to actually do their job. And if basically businesses end up spending loads of money on people who have had political experience and they assume can help them get contracts in the future, if that's genuinely what they're doing, that's not great for business. Like our business is like we suffer as societies because our businesses aren't being creative, because the best businessmen aren't being given the jobs, because they're being given to fucking Nick Clegg.
And yeah, just to clarify, he's the he's the Facebook global director of communications, and uh, I'm
Because
not
because
expert about it.
because the first thing that comes to mind when I think of Nick Clegg is a master communicator. He was so great at
Yeah,
communicating.
uh, and he lost his seat in Sheffield. And yeah, I'm going back to Sajid Javid. I just think this guy could have been prime minister. You know,
Shabazz, you okay? I think your mic's dropping out.
you know, no, can you hear me?
Uh,
Uh,
y-
uh, yeah, yeah, he could have been prime minister uh, without anybody voting for him apart from the Tory party. But
real
still,
talk,
the
I
Tory
think
party
that
is.
real talk, I think that was always fairly negligible. Like honestly, the fact that he stood does not actually mean he stood an equal chance of winning. It's a bit like
No,
it's a
but
bit like
he stood twice,
yeah, but there was I
and
doubt he
and
would have won in either case. But carry on.
and, and what all I'm saying is, in one of those cases, the vote wouldn't have gone to the country; it would have gone to
In
the local. Well, the
1922 committee, basically, but
yeah,
the conservative
all of the.
politicians as well.
And the point I would like to make there is one of the reasons I bet you they didn't choose him is because a lot of them are still pretty racist,
I mean,
and
I suspect. I mean, again, it, it a lot of people didn't get the didn't a lot of people didn't get that particular position, and I suspect one of the major reasons why they didn't, and for many of them it was because like it's like Michael Gove stood. Like honestly, quite a lot of the people who are at the top of the Conservative Party are what might be regarded as policy wonks. Essentially, it's their job to push to push a base that has a very specific set of concerns. And honestly, like in some ways, he was one of those people. In the end, those people rarely become leaders. Like Michael Gove is probably not going to be a Conservative leader. And in the end, Boris Johnson was probably not going to be a Conservative leader if Brexit, etc., etc. So I think that I hesitate to I'm not going to argue that the Conservative Party doesn't have a racist element. I am you know I can't imagine he wasn't the most qualified person in the pack. He wasn't the best policy person in the pack. He certainly wasn't like politically skilled enough. Like honestly, you know,
By the by the by the way, can I just clarify? I'm not advocating that I wanted him to be prime minister, or that he deserves to be prime minister, or that he would be any good at the job. I'm just saying that he was very close to being. He was closer than you or I being the prime
yes,
minister.
yeah. I mean, that's not a hard that's not a high bar, but yes, you're not wrong.
Yeah, yeah. But that's what I'm saying is that he he could have potentially been prime minister, and with all of his influence that he's had in the banking sector and all of this kind of thing, and when he did become chancellor, it wasn't as if became chancellor and he tightened all the laws and you know, you know, made it more robust. So we did have another 2008. You know.
Oh yeah, yeah. And I think that one of the interesting things that actually a book came out, I think earlier this year, called Dark Tower, and this is about Deutsche Bank, and again he's worked for a couple of banks, but Deutsche Bank is one of the places where he was manager and blah blah blah. I think it was the last place he worked before came into British politics, but. Um, and it's really interesting because Dark Tower is specifically about Deutsche Bank and just how bad they are. Like, it's
Can you give us an example?
the most hilarious example. Um,
Have you read the entire book?
I watched an interview by the author. I must admit, this is a particularly good example. They have been giving loans to Donald Trump. Um, but which immediately is just like, really? He's gone bankrupt like 8 times. Why are you giving loans to him? Like, his credit rating must be garbage. The idea, his credit rating must be worse than mine. So they gave him 650 million pounds. All I can say is I want 650 million pounds. But
They gave who? Who
Donald
that
Trump,
money?
Donald
Okay.
Trump. And honestly, but the most hilarious example of this, at one point, one of the areas of their banking system, he already owed them hundreds of millions of pounds. And so another area of their banking system loaned him the money to pay back the other area of the banking system. So
Okay.
they already knew in their own bank that he owed them hundreds of millions of pounds. And so another part of their banking system gave him the money to pay back the first part of the banking system.
Right. Okay.
And this is the argument. And basically, the investment banking side wanted to give him the money. And the argument they used for why he should have the money was that the reason why the banking system didn't want him to have the money was because they hated the investment side, and the investment side was and so because they wanted the investment side to fail, the investment side wanted to give him the money. It is miraculously stupid. I have no idea. This is banking by high school logic.
Yeah.
So and so this kind, and so others, and it's also worth pointing out that they have been at the heart of a whole series, that they've been like fined 180 million, I think, for various different banking scandals, including like banking with a whole bunch of incredibly shady people, including money laundering for actual drug dealers, including an incredibly like blatant money laundering for a whole load of drug dealers. You know, they've been doing some incredibly skeezy stuff. And not to mention, I'm sure you can imagine the normal thing of offshore banking and blah and tax avoidance and blah blah blah
This is
blah.
this is Deutsche Bank. Yeah.
Yeah, and so yay. And
How do we?
this is his
How do
previous
we?
employer.
Yeah. How do we fix this problem then?
Um, I mean, honestly, I would argue that MI5 and MI6 should be brought in. I mean, first
What
point,
the?
first point, I'm not sure why we argue that tax avoidance isn't a national security issue, because it is. Like, we need to pay our army money in order for them to defend us. And if people are basically going, yeah, I'm not paying my taxes, deal with it. Like, I'm sorry, going on, like, if the entire army just decided to go on strike, that would be considered a national security issue. So if groups of people decide to just not pay their taxes and therefore not like help in defense. Again, I'm not sure why that's not considered to be a national security issue. So, national security issue. And honestly, none of this stuff is clever. Like, let's be perfectly frank. All of this stuff is just it's some of it's illegal, some of it's not, but all of it's just like incredibly like it's not like this is going to be the hardest thing that GCHQ and and MI6 have ever done. Like, actually coming up with a trail is not hard. I mean, honestly, Dark Towers got written almost entirely from emails that were on Hotmail and I think Gmail accounts. Like, that was given by the son after the father committed suicide. After some incredibly skeezy stuff happened. Yeah. So in the
Don't
end,
get you.
so in
Don't
terms
get
of,
yourself. Sorry, go on. Don't get yourself into hot legal water here. Be careful.
well, I mean, it's all in Dark Towers, so honestly, like, it's all public. But you know, so um, so in the end, it's not it. So in the end, it's not like this will be the hardest thing they've ever done in the whole history of humanity, and it's not like hacking into half of these places. It's like the fact that banks consider themselves to be like international banking is like international. It's basically purely a case of places like intelligence services don't bother hacking into them because they just don't consider it to be part of their jobs. I'm not sure why, and I'm not sure why everyone else like goes along with this idea. So in the end, like, I mean, it's
It's
worth pointing.
not.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth pointing out that states exist purely because, like, they need two things. They need a base of they need a population base who and who have land that they can live on and blah blah blah, aka a society, and a tax base that means that the government can run. In the end, in the end, striking generally attacks the population base and the population base working, to be more precise, partly taxes as well, and the and tax avoidance strikes the money base, the tax base. I don't know why the government treats it like it's some sort of weird mystical thing that is impossible to fix. It's
I think the media has to take some blame here as well,
I,
because I think, you know, I know there's lots of stuff going on, but I don't think this kind of thing gets reported that much. And years ago, sometimes these kind of stories become really big and like it gets into the consciousness of people. But this one has been kind of like, oh, this has happened again, as a surprise. It become normalized, and it's not even a scandal. It's just, oh, they've done what they usually do, which 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 they may do that, but I think there comes a time where you have to go, well, we have to do something about this.
I tend to try to avoid thinking about the media in these contexts because, to be honest with you, I think the media doesn't have that much place in politics, and I think that generally, it's interesting. It's interesting. There was some discussions about the Supreme Court in the US, and one of the major theories around Donald Trump and his supporters was that if they could capture the Supreme Court, then that would become like a massive like third wave of American politics, and they could do whatever they wanted. And basically, this was and basically this guy was saying, well, he thinks that this theory is kind of stupid because A, it almost never works, and B, actually, one of the things about the Supreme Court is it generally kind of centers around the middle, and there's and basically the broad thesis was that actually politics is done within the three branches of government, or more precisely within two branches of the three branches of government in the US. And so trying to bring a third in and that kind of thing, it doesn't work, and it's not very good politics. And in some ways, I tend to think it's kind of similar to that I tend to think that it's kind of similar to that when people bring media into it. I mean, real talk, many media personalities don't agree with both of us around many topics. So even if we did say, I want you to actually have a political position, would they necessarily agree with us? If, assuming those ones who did agree with us, would that immediately fix the situation? Probably not.
No, but
So
no, but the media is there to amplify stuff, right?
no, I think they would argue. I mean, and again, I think there's a nuance here that, in my experience.
Sorry, isn't that to amplify? They're not there to amplify stuff, but they can amplify stuff. Is what I mean. What I meant to say.
I mean, I don't know what. I mean, I think there's a nuance here that if you're talking about Fox News or something like that, that's unique across. That's kind of unique. And again, in a democratic society, you don't get something like Fox News. You shouldn't, to be fair. So I think that arguing that you want that, yeah, in some ways, I don't want to completely derail this by talking about media, but I do think that it's.
I just mentioned the word, and you
to
just go off for one. So let's have it then. Because you seem to have trigger buttons, media, capitalism. These are the two I could get you on. Right?
I think that there's an interesting thing that we were going through a paper on actually produced by the Parliament on the on politicians and second jobs and things like that. And honestly, it was interesting that they were kind of going back and they were talking about they were implying that back in the 1980s, and there was overall a tone of when things were fine and when civilization was at its height. And honestly, I kind of think that our policy making was really bad then. I'm sorry, find me one person who genuinely would talk about the high point of British politics as the 1980s. I mean, basically British politics from the end of the 60s to the
Sajid Javid, because he apparently had a poster about Thatcher.
and apparently it's also and apparently a whole load of people think whoever wrote this paper thought something similar. I would argue that if you look at it from a policy making perspective, I can't really see why. I would like to actually debate someone on this point, because even if you look at her from two of her genuine achievements, if you look at it from the closing of the coal mines, I'm going to get so much shit from this from some of my left-wing friends, but arguably it would have been miraculously stupid to continue having coal mines open when we were basically having to pay half the wages of the workers. Why do that? Because basically coal mining was becoming too expensive to be done in the UK. We could buy it in from cheaper, and so in order for the British to actually export coal and actually get something from it, or even sell it to our own population, we would have the government would basically have to put money into the entire thing and make coal artificially cheaper, which basically means that the British state would end up paying for half the wages of the workers. This, why? So I think that is not the worst argument. But I think that if you're talking about this from a good policy making perspective, you would have to go, okay, so what do we think that the population is going to do next? Even if you want to go, you know what, crushing the unions is fine. I would argue that, but in the end, having loads of unemployed people at the end of it is bad, shockingly enough. And honestly, you would have thought that you would have had to have invented, like, you had to like create an entirely new industry that could go into those places and give those people jobs. But no, she was just like, well, they can just get on their bikes, which again, this is bad policy. And honestly, another interesting example is like if you look at the closing down of mental institutions. Again, good. What does she do? She basically ends up just throwing them on the social services without giving social services loads more money and loads more staff. I mean, again, from a purely policy making perspective, what do you think is going to result in that? We're going to result from that? Why is this a good idea? And so I don't know why you would argue that that period was some great period of policy making. And so in terms of why anyone would go, but it was fine then. So why not just do it again? Well, because it didn't have a particularly good result then. So why are we assuming that this has a good result now? Sorry.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I mean, just to take it back to the media and things like that, I think that from that period there was generally a theory that there was this kind of fifth branch of British government that was the media, and or fourth, or in America it's called the branch of fourth branch of government. And I genuinely think that that was an idea that comes from kind of people's despair at policy making. And I think that they're right that policy making was bad. I'm not sure why they think that the answer to bad policy making is to appoint a fourth branch of government and then hope that they're going to make policy making good, when we have a third branch, when in Britain we have a fourth branch of government, Parliament, to make policy. And if they don't do that job, I'm not sure why people imagine someone else is going to. Sorry.
No, say what you want. Say what you want. Yes. So, is there any last remarks that need to be made in
No.
terms of Sajid Javid and his banking career?
No,
I
I'm good.
just wanted to what? Yeah,
I'm good.
I wanted to say that. Well, I just wanted to say that. Yeah, I think MPs and second jobs is a really, really bad idea, and they shouldn't be allowed to have them for at least a year after they've left an MP's job, and they shouldn't be able to have them during the time they are MPs. That's what I think.
It's more complicated than that.
I know you're going to say that, but I'm just going to say that's what I wanted to say.
Yeah. I mean, I think my main concern is the fact that there are entire industries that are that a major part of the career progression. And again, it's not just within the banking system. There's groups like McKinsey. There is many arms manufacturers have something similar. There's quite a few industries that have that. Yeah.
Because I would argue, like, who are they making the laws for? Who are they working for? Are they working for the government, or are they working for their previous employer, or are they working for themselves?
But I think
what you've got to think about.
Well, I think that there's a problem with it. This goes back to a Roman phrase, who watches the watchers. And to some degree, we have to trust the watchers to watch the watchers. There's no point in having an army for the army, and then having an army for the army's army, and then having an army for the army's army. honestly, at some point, the entire thing just gets legally ridiculous. The problem becomes if you have groups that specifically, if you have highly paid, highly trained, groups with that people spend their careers in, who have who again, I don't know if you would argue, who don't have an interest who don't have any motivation for the success of politics to be made better for a majority of the population. As soon as you get to that point, we have a major problem.
Yeah.
And that is because we're no longer into a conversation of this is human nature. We're now in a conversation of a group of people is basically undermining human nature and try in order to get to the goodies. So I think, yeah.
And going back to the media, I think that the media don't have a go at these people because large amounts of the media are in the same sort of circles. So them having a go at them would be having a go at themselves.
I
You
mean,
know?
it is worth pointing out that when there was this article that was put out by Parliament, and it was quite funny. It's a couple of years old now, but basically it was one of those. One of the most one of the funniest things I read is when political and bureaucratic things are just being too honest. It is really funny. And this is one of those articles that was just too honest. And it talked about 4 groups that politicians that are normally politicians normally have as second jobs. And one of them was a journalist. So honestly, Boris Johnson did this. There's probably quite a few journalists who want to have a career at some point as an MP. There are quite a few MPs who make a side hustle as journalists, and so it's the same. So basically, many journalists, especially if you work for the Times or the Mail or yada yada yada, then they are they go to the same Christmas parties as the politicians who make money out of these kinds of side hustles. Like, why would they criticize someone who might be their secret Santa?
Yeah. That's something that's worth bearing in mind, I think. And yeah, good luck to Sajid Javid. Not that he needs it. He's
he
50 years
seems to have
old.
his shit firmly together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I'm not.
I just wanted to finish on one little funny little thing that's tickled me for a couple of years. Sajid Javid, when he first did a leadership run, he he did a little video of him and his family and this, that, and the other. And at the end of the video, inexplicably, they had his children saying to him as he was leaving the house, and we'll finish the episode on this. Is when his kid said to him, "Daddy, Daddy, don't forget the samosas."
Okay.
Anyway, that's it for this week.
Right.
I'll
See you,
catch you
people.
again. Bye.